Mr. Rouse has been involved in community and social work since 1961 and is currently a case manager, Small Business Development Project at Economic Opportunity Program Incorporated, Elmira, New York. This interview is being conducted on October 3rd, 1989 at Mr. Rouse's residence, 52 Grove Street, Elmira, New York. The interviewer is Nellie L. Jennings, representing the Oral History Project for Chemung County Historical Society. Mr. Rouse, when did your family first come to this area?
Well, I am told that my family came to the Elmira area in the 1930s. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific in terms of the year, but they were here as a result of my uncle working for the railroad. And once he was here and had worked for a while, he sent for my grandfather, who then came up and also worked for the railroad, and eventually brought his family to the area.
Where did they come from?
Well, my grandfather on Jennings emanated from South Carolina.
And what year were you born?
I was born in 1938.
And how many children did your father and mother have?
4.
Two girls?
2 girls and 2 boys. I am the oldest.
And where did you attend elementary school?
I attended Thomas K. Beecher School in Elmira. Graduated from there in 1952.
Did you have any positive experience or special teachers?
My elementary school years were, I thought, very good for me. At the time, in Elmira, there were not that many black students in the school. And the school itself, the atmosphere of the school was very conducive for learning and whatever social outlets we needed in our neighborhood at the time.
What about special teachers?
Well, there are some teachers that I recall who in some ways left a lasting impression with me because of the care and the time that they spent with us, more or less on an individual basis. We had a second grade teacher by the name of Mrs. Lorch, Lorch, who ironically lived right across the street from the school, who was very instrumental because she was so effective with her teaching and seemed to find a way to make everybody feel like we were one of hers. Also had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Persons, who was the musical teacher. She handled that department for the school, and I participated in a number of the choral groups which she conducted, and felt that that experience was a very positive one for me because I was interested in music.
When, besides choral groups, did you take any other musical instruments in the elementary grades?
Not through the school system. I studied piano, but that was done on a private basis.
Well, now, what year did you start attending high school and where?
Well, I started high school also in the fall of 1952 at Elmira Free Academy. At that time, the Elmira Free Academy is what's now known as the Ernie Davis Junior High School.
Mr. Rouse, and when you were in high school, what subjects did you take?
Well, in high school, I took what was known as a academic course in high school, one that would hopefully prepare a student for post-high school, preferably college, attendance at college.
I see. What about sports? Was sports important to you?
Well, sports was important to me, but while I was in high school, I participated only in track. I spent 4 years running track and was reasonably successful at doing that. Earned my letter for the academy during my tenure at the academy. I was more interested in varying my high school experiences. I was involved in the music program and some of the student government. And of course, really wanted to study because I did in fact want to attend college.
I see. Well, still back to high school, when you participated in track, did you win any medals besides your letter, or?
Oh yes, I say we because during high school my brother and I ran track together and participated as part of a team in a lot of the events, and we were successfully won ribbons, trophies, and recognition as being, successful track people or trackmen.
And did you attend have a lot of school activities, after-school activities besides track?
Not really, because during high school I did a lot of work in order to help put together the money that I anticipated needing for college. So by the time I had entered high school, I had already been working regularly as a busboy at the old Mark Twain Hotel. And I continued doing that after schools, weekends, summer vacations until I graduated from college.
I see. Well, the Neighborhood House was very popular in that area. Did you go to the Neighborhood House a lot?
Not as a child, or not as a young person, I did not go to the Neighborhood House.
Why was that?
Well, it was mainly because of my family's religious beliefs at the time, and that was one reason. The other reason was I really didn't have the time. Between work, school, I did not have time to spend that way. At least I didn't at that time.
I see. What church did your family belong to?
Well, we belonged to the Church of God in Christ at 351 East 5th Street. You might say I was born, born into the church. It's always been the church of my family. And it was it's a fundamental church that had some very stringent beliefs in terms of how one was to conduct themselves.
I see. You spoke about you worked a lot. What was your first job?
Well, my first job, of course, was the paper route. My brother and I had what was the equivalent to 2 paper routes. One we did in the morning before we went to school, down on the east side. And the second one was one that we did after school that was expanded to include what was known as Uptown, which is now up around the Dickinson, Baldwin, 3rd Street, 4th Street area. And we did that until I started working at the Mark Twain Hotel.
And what did you do there?
At the hotel?
Yeah.
I started out as a busboy, worked like that for several years. And then during the summers, I did a number of jobs, but the 2 main jobs was to work as a houseman. I spent doing that one summer, and and then I became a waiter, and I waited tables.
Were those type of jobs the only kind that were available to blacks in that in those years?
No, it wasn't the only kind of type of jobs, but in terms of what one would do, it was representative of the type of work that particularly a minority could find. I didn't mention I did spend part of a school year in the summer doing extra work at the hotel as a shoeshine boy with Shorty Johnson. He taught me how to do that, and I did that for extra money along with my other duties.
Did you ever, were you a waiter anywhere else besides the Mark Twain?
Yes, but that came after I graduated from college.
I see.
I worked at Pierce's as a waiter while I was a caseworker for the county back in the early 60s.
What year did you graduate?
From high school?
Yes.
In 1956.
And then you planned to go to college.
Yes.
And what college did you choose?
Well, I chose Alfred University for a couple of reasons. One is the size. I was impressed with the size and the tranquility of the college and their apparent receptiveness to my application at the time. Remembering this was 1956, and it wasn't many blacks from our community that was attending college. It's certainly not that close to our home.
How many colleges had you applied to?
Well, as I recall now, I only applied to 3 colleges. The one that sticks out in my mind, in addition to Alfred University, was Harper College, which is down in Binghamton now. I understand now it's part of the SUNY Binghamton program. It was like a forerunner of that, getting of it. And I had considered Hobart. Okay. 1956, I feel, is a significant year for minorities, the youth of minorities in that at that time. From my class, there were several of us who did in fact go on to college and eventually earn our degrees. And of that group, there are 3 of us working in the community now.
Oh, that's significant when you stop and think of it. Did in applying for college, did the SAT scores have a significant difference of what college you were going to choose?
Yes, they had the SATs then, and the college entrance exams, I guess is what they referred to more readily at that point, but it was essentially the same type of thing. That was very significant, your class average, and at Alfred they were very interested during my interview in knowing the other involvements I had within the high school community. And they seemed to be pleased with the fact that I had been involved at high school beyond just sports and the academics.
I see. Did you, what major did you decide Um,
Well, when I started Alfred, my intent was to pursue a pre-med program. But after my second year, I decided that that really wasn't what I wanted for a number of reasons. But the primary one was that I had this overwhelming feeling, if you, for lack of a better way to describe it, I wanted to do something that required me to work with people. But I wanted to work with people in a different manner than as a doctor. And I eventually changed my major to sociology with a minor in psychology.
I see. What year did you graduate from college?
In 1961, I actually got my degree.
And at that time, 1961, what did you think you were going to do after college?
Well, I needed a job. And I came home at the end of the semester, the first semester, because I completed my work like in February of 1961. I came home and I took self-serve examination for a caseworker for the county. However, interestingly enough, at that time, I wasn't hired under a provisional and was required to wait until the results of the tests were back. That took some time from February until August before that was, I knew how well I did or if I passed or whatever have you. Once I had passed the test, I was hired by the county.
And when you say the county, you were
Oh, excuse me.
what department?
Yes, the county, the Department of Social Services. I spent the time from March of '62 until I eventually started working for the Department of Social Services, working as a garbage man for the city. I needed money, and I had to wait to find out how I did on the test.
I see. Well, at that time, what else did you do? What year were you 21?
What year was I 21? Oh, let's see, 1960, 61, 62.
Well, anyway, were you still in college? Did you vote? I guess what I'm getting at is, did you vote when you were 21?
I voted the first year I was eligible to vote. Okay.
Did you feel that voting was important?
It was important, but I should probably interject that following my being hired by the Department of Social Services and started working in August of 1961, I started working on the 19th, as I recall. A week later, excuse me, let me go back. I was notified and I was scheduled to start working on the 19th, but I got married on the 12th. I was to start on the 19th. A week later, I was drafted. At the same time that I was supposed to start working for the department. So in fact, I only worked for the Department of Social Services for approximately a month before I had to leave to go to the service, because I left on September 13th, 1961.
And what branch of
In
service?
the Army.
In the Army?
Mm-hmm.
And where did that take you? Your basic training?
Yeah, my basic training was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. I was there for 6 weeks. And then I was sent for advanced infantry training at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. I was there for another 8 weeks, which was not the place to be for a black man in 1961. And from there, in February of '62, I was sent to Germany.
At that time, the selective service was still in effect.
Right.
And you'd gotten married, and you'd
Right.
been to college,
Right.
graduated, and I assume that you must have had to pay college loans.
Yes, I did.
Did you have to continue to pay them
I
while
had-
you were in the service?
I did, yes. I was required to, yes.
So, how much did you make as a serviceman?
Well, my portion of my service allotment was like $97 a month in terms of actual cash. And then I had an allotment that I had taken out for my wife, which was another amount, but I can't remember exactly what that was.
How much was your college loan?
Well, at first it was like, that's a good question.
Well,
It was in the neighborhood of $30 a month at that time. Yeah, it was about that I had to pay a month.
so you really didn't have a lot of money left
no,
over.
No, I didn't.
At that time, you could not be deferred from your college loans if you were drafted into the
No,
service.
I did make an attempt to get it deferred until after I came out of the service, but I wasn't permitted to do so.
Did they ever tell you why?
No, and no, they didn't. They just said that it couldn't be done.
At that time you were in the service, were there any war actions or conflicts?
Yes, that's why I was sent to Germany for the Berlin crisis.
And how long were you there?
Well, I was supposed to be in Germany for 18 months, but approximately 9 months after I was there, we were notified, our entire unit was notified, that we were being moved en masse back to the United States, and our place was going to be taken by a similar sized unit from the United States to Germany. So in September of '62, as a member of the advanced party for my unit, I then was restationed at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Could you tell me more about this unit?
Well, we were an infantry unit, the 1st Battle Group 26 Army Infantry Division, and I was an operations specialist for a headquarters company for this unit, and that is why I was with the advanced party to help with the transition between the two stations.
And what rank were you at that time?
Well, at that time I was a corporal,
I see.
or
And-
E2.
I see. And what, when you come out of the Army, what rank were you?
Sergeant or Spec 4.
I see. After you had come back from Germany, you were located where?
In Fort Benning, Georgia.
And then what happened?
Well, shortly after we arrived at Fort Benning, we were put on alert for the situation involving the Bay of Pigs. Although no actual action took place as a result of that, but we were alerted to be ready for that. And then in the spring, late spring of 1963, we were alerted to move to Alabama as a result of the racial disturbances at the University of Alabama caused by Governor George Wallace's trying to prevent the integration of the university. So our unit moved from Fort Benning, Georgia to Fort McClellan, Alabama in preparation for that, in anticipation of keeping peace, so to speak.
Was the Army integrated at this time?
Oh yes, it was integrated.
How did your fellow servicemen feel about this action?
Well, it's interesting because the majority of the soldiers in the Army are Southerners. Okay, you had, and while stationed in Germany, and we all thought we were facing imminent danger, the relationship between the black soldiers and the white soldiers, regardless of where they came from, was very cordial because we knew we were dependent upon each other should we be called into battle for any reason. Now, even though when we came back to the United States the same situation prevailed, there was a difference in the relationship between particularly the white Southern soldier and the blacks, and you felt that acutely. The communications and the relationship between soldiers was a lot more distant, and almost only what was necessary took place. Okay. However, when we were called into the situation involving the University of Alabama, I think there was just kind of a general fear and anticipation because none of us knew what to expect.
Well, I guess you could really think this was a very important event at the time because you were away from the United States in Germany, and you were facing someone who might possibly have some repercussions on the United States, and then you come back to the United States and you don't know who you're against or who you're for.
Well, there was a dilemma, I think, for both the black and white soldiers, depending on their own persuasion. But if you were a white Southern soldier, you saw what you believed in, what you were raised in terms of the atmosphere and your community being challenged, and you were in a position where you had to defend whatever the government said you had to do. Likewise, the black soldier who was hoping that this integration attempt would foster better opportunities for his people in this country, was called on to do the same thing. So even though that you were both feeling drawn or pulled in different directions, we were governed essentially by the United States government because we were hired by the government.
I see. When the year that you come out of the Army, where were you discharged from? What part of the country?
Well, when I was separated at Fort Benning, Georgia, and in 1963, September 1963, and then we drove from Georgia back north to Elmira.
It must have been quite a trip.
Well, yes, it was. It was. For personal reasons, the car that we had purchased was no good, and it was a arduous trip getting back home, but we made it.
So when you come back home to Elmira, what part of Elmira did you decide to settle down in?
Well, we returned to Elmira to my home with my parents until I could find a job and get myself established again. The Department of Social Services held a job position open for me. Now, even though it was the same position as a caseworker, it wasn't kept for me in terms of tenure. They just made it possible for me to come back, start again in a sense of speaking, as a caseworker, so that I gained nothing in terms of remuneration during the 2 years I was away. And the reason, and it was a legitimate reason, is that I hadn't been there long enough. I was only there about a month, but they did hold a job open, and I started working shortly after I came back.
And then when you left your parents' home, what part of the city did you live in?
We took an apartment in the northeastern part of the city on Lackawanna Avenue.
Was housing difficult?
Well, it was difficult in that, from a personal point of view, I had an idea where I wanted to live in order to promote the kind of goals that I had for myself, and that was difficult. And we had some difficulty finding housing in other parts of the city when we made the attempt to look for it.
When you say difficult, difficult because your skin was of a different color?
Well, that's what I believe, yes.
I see. We're up to about 1964 now. And how long did you stay with the Department of Social Services?
I stayed there until 1966, at which time I had taken a New York State Civil Service examination for
a psychiatric trainee?
social worker training.
I see.
And I was canvassed by two New York State institutions, the Binghamton Psychiatric Hospital, that's what they was called at that time, and the Newark State School for the Mentally Retarded. They were all both under the Department of Mental Health. I took both interviews and decided to go with the Newark State School position if I was accepted. And I was offered a position at Newark State School.
I see. I want to back up just a little bit. I'd like to know where you were when Kennedy was assassinated and what you felt about it.
Well, unfortunately, the day that he was assassinated, we were attending a welfare conference in Rochester, New York. And we had taken our lunch break when the news came over that he had been shot. And before there was a confirmation that he was actually killed, the conference came to an absolute stop. And we were dismissed from the conference, and everybody was feeling, loss of our national leader. And there was remorse and sadness and grief, and an anticipation as to what was going to follow. So the trip back home after that was a long one and a sad one. But that's what I was doing on the day he was assassinated. It was particularly significant because of my own personal history, immediate history is being in the South, being a part of the integration efforts in Alabama, being in an atmosphere where I literally, for the first time in my life, saw the overt hatred and dislike that one person can have for another, or one people can have for other people. The election of President Kennedy and the direction he had planned for us in terms of racial relations was very encouraging. We had a long way to go, but at least the blueprint had been shared. And so the loss was tremendously felt because we had no idea how it was going to be continued, or if it was going to be continued. So the months and the years following that event, myself, along with some other younger black men and women who wanted to somehow affect a change in our own community, developed a newspaper known as The Key, in which we tried to promote racial harmony, racial understanding. We tried to raise some questions that we felt needed to be asked of our community. We tried to involve other people in the struggle, not only nationally, but more importantly, locally at that time. You also have to keep in mind that the makeup of our community, Elmira at that time, was much different than it is today. That what blacks call uptown, which was kind of the business and social center for the minorities in Elmira, was a much more residential and defined area than it is now. So a lot of the activities emanated from in that neighborhood, in that area of the community. Our churches were there, the businesses were there, the clubs were there. The Neighborhood House was right across the street from where we started The Key from. And we did have what we felt a significant number of sympathizers. All of them weren't participants, active participants, but sympathizers with our efforts to make known that we are a people in this community that wanted to become more involved in our own community.
Okay, and 1966, you were still with you were working for the state then.
I started working for the state in 1966, right. Excuse me, I misunderstood your question. I was still working for the state for the first part of 1966. I did not start at that point. I started in 1964 and ended in 66. In 1966, I returned to Elmira to take the position of the out-of-school coordinator for the Neighborhood Youth Corps, which was one of the anti-poverty programs, which was an exciting opportunity I felt for our people.
And how long were you with them?
I worked as the out-of-school coordinator from 1966 to 1968, and then I became the director of the Neighborhood Youth Corps until from 1968 to 1970, and in 1970 I became the executive director of the Elmira Neighborhood House.
Well, I want to back up again,
Okay.
back to, right, uh, when your job at the youth corps, or when you were with the youth corps, uh, were there riots and um, racial riots in that particular era of time?
Well, we uh, locally, I don't think we would have what you would call a bona fide riot. But what we had was some very significant civil disobediences and some problems that developed out of the races not understanding or accepting what was going on. And there were several situations that developed which required that the leaders of both communities uh, work through them in order to come to some understanding as to how we were going to move from this point on. I remember one that took place uptown by the Neighborhood House. There were a series of incidents that took place with, for example, white people driving through uptown late in the evening where they would run into some disturbances brought on by blacks that were on the street corners or coming out of some of the buildings. And that kind of thing escalated to the point where it got fairly heated. And many of the leaders of both sides of the community were forced to come in and take some action. I remember my uncle, Chuck Jennings, playing a very significant role in trying to quell some of those types of situations. Some of us had played lesser roles, but we were all present and were aware of what was going on and was doing what we could to keep sort of the lid on things, so to speak.
These anti-poverty programs, what did they entail or encompass?
Well, generally for the country, it offered many people, black and white, mostly the indigent or poor, the lower socioeconomic strata, an opportunity to look for a better future, look for some training, look for some relief from unemployment, to look for some concern on the part of the country and their respective communities to help them improve the quality of their lives. And for black people, this meant that we could theoretically have an opportunity to improve our lot much more than we were able to do up to that point. Many of the nature of the programs that we ran were designed essentially to help people raise themselves to more than a subsistence level.
Well, who paid for these programs?
The government, through the anti-poverty legislation and funding.
I see.
Locally, that was had handled by the EOP, which was known as a community action agency, and it had the overall responsibility of designing and implementing the various programs that would address the issues that I alluded to earlier.
At that time, did any local monies or state monies go into these programs?
Not initially. It was largely funded by the federal government. And the way funding was handled at that time, that was the most direct way to do that and to give local communities some autonomy in designing programs that would meet their own specific needs, whatever they may be.
So you were originally with the out-of-school program,
Mm-hmm.
and it was funded by the government.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was this out-of-school program, and who was it for?
Well, the out-of-school program was a youth organized program designed to help youngsters who had dropped out of school for one reason or another and needed assistance in securing employment and in training And the Neighborhood Youth Corps attempted to meet those kinds of needs. We created jobs, and we paid young people to work these jobs in the public sector primarily. We also conducted what is known as the GED tests, GED programs to get kids ready to take the test, okay, so that they could upgrade.
GED.
Yes, it's the high school equivalency program, so that they could improve their station in life. We also was very instrumental in getting a number of our young people that were part of the Youth Corps into colleges, which was also a thrust that was encouraged and made possible by the government through the poverty program's existence. It was a time when minorities and low-income people, if they were so disposed, could have taken advantage of this opportunity to really improve their lot in life.
And looking back, did it work?
Well, that's an interesting question. Depending on who you talk to, I think you'll get different answers. By and large, from a concept point of view, it worked. It did not work as well as it could have because of the various people involved and the enormity of the problem that was being undertaken. But it did work in some cases. It did not work as well as it could have in others. And it's like anything else. People tend not to take advantages of opportunities, and I think that happened a lot. Or they didn't make the most of those opportunities.
Do you think it helped some of the young people in Elmira?
Yes, I know it did.
Can you give me one experience, or?
Well, I can't give you names like that, but I can tell you, for example, that through the cooperation with Elmira College and the EOP through the Neighborhood Youth Corps and a program that was known as the Urban Education back at that time, we were able to design and execute a program known as ACES, which was designed to give high school juniors and seniors an opportunity to experience the college academic experience by going to the college, taking a college course on weekends, taught by Elmira College professors, and the counseling was handled by the Youth Corps, myself and the people that worked with me and my staff. Actually, that went a little bit before that because my predecessor as director, Rudy McNoney, was very instrumental in getting this going and was very important in setting up how it was going to operate. There were many youngsters who took advantage of this, and as a result of it, did in fact apply and enroll and attended college. I know that for a fact.
So it did help upgrade.
Right. And even though a lot of them didn't finish college to graduation, it exposed them to a different way of living, and it developed an appreciation for education in a real way. And at that point, even now, some of the young people that were a part of that effort, I've had opportunity to talk with, and I can see how that impacted on them, and they are aware of it because they've shared that with me.
At this time, there were a lot of new things going on in the country. People, anti-poverty programs and the Great Society programs and all of those things, and all of this had to do with civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
So how was Elmira involved in civil rights?
Well, we were involved, but not in the really overt manner as some of the larger communities, or the communities that were located in and around larger metropolitan areas. You might recall that as we entered into the latter 60s and into the early 70s, the real intensity of the Black Revolution quotations had taken place. You know, you see real riots in the largest cities, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York, places like that, California, the Watts and all that. And out of that grew all kinds of factions. And the Community Action Agency, or the EOP as we know it, we were involved because it was our business to be involved. We had to understand what was going on. We made the trips to Washington, to where laws and government policy was being designed and discussed. We tried to implement as much as possible, as much as our funding level would permit, as well as our community would permit, what was coming out of what was happening on a national level. Okay? And then unfortunately for us, or in some ways I think it's fortunate, although I probably get some other opinions about that, around the same time the advent of urban renewal was in our area. And the city of Elmira was looking at how it was going to clean up the city of Elmira, particularly the blighted areas of Elmira. And they were going to use the urban renewal as a vehicle in order to begin to do that. But before that could be fully implemented, we were hit with the flood of 1972, which in a lot of ways facilitated that program and made it happen sooner. But more importantly, it did some other things for the community. It forced a kind of redistribution of the citizens of our community. The blighted areas of our community had to be dealt with then. I mean, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, you had to do something about that. And people, as a result of the relocation requirement then, our community became less segmented. And blacks, for example, weren't relegated to essentially the east side of Elmira. And you'll see that even today that is still very true, where an open housing policy sort of was a product of the advent of urban renewal, which was compounded by the flood of 72. So that made the work that we were doing through EOP, and at that time, the flood time, I wasn't with EOP, but I was still very sympathetic to what they were doing. They had to look at how they could become a much more supportive agent to facilitate all of these kinds of things that were taking place in the community.
In 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. What were your feelings about that?
Well, I was like any other, I suppose, black person. I was really devastated by the fact that we had finally come up with somebody that uh, could represent a positive, strong leader, real or imagined. Although there were other men and women out at the time that were trying to fill a similar void. Malcolm X, and we had the what I call like the street corner preachers, H. Rat Brown and Hoagie Carmichael, Stokely Carmichael rather, were all very vocal, but the person that seemed to have the philosophical approach, the educational background, the superiority in thinking and planning and organizing was Dr. King. And his loss was really devastating to the black movement, I think.
I think it was too. Um, when did you leave the community action agency? At that time, did it become the EOP?
No, our community action agency was called the EOP right from the beginning,
Okay.
Economic Opportunity Program. The CAP agencies, which is how they are referred to in the legislation, represented the framework for the local areas, your local community action to be organized and to be funded. But they were like private entities, okay? And the EOP is essentially a county-wide entity, private, nonprofit, and it's called EOP, but it's funded through the CAP agency legislation.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
At the time that you left EOP,
right.
what year was it?
At the end of 1969, and I started as the executive director of the Neighborhood House, the first working day in 1970.
So, when, at the time, Neighborhood House, let's talk
Mhm.
about Neighborhood House. The old Neighborhood House was still in existence at
Yes,
that time.
it was. It was on the corner. It was on the southwest corner of Dixon and Fifth Streets, and it was a series of 3 buildings that were put together over a period of many years that represented a multi-functional community agency that was frequently frequented by all members of the community, but many of the blacks, particularly the black youth, identify very strongly with that agency because it offered a safe place for them to meet and socialize and have athletic events.
You said there were many people there. Well, who was in the old Neighborhood House? What programs did you have in there?
Well, when I took over in 1970, we had a myriad of programs that were fairly divergent in nature. We had everything from our rifle range, where we taught the hunter safety program, to boating safety programs. We had crafts, arts and crafts programs. We had chair upholstering programs. Nursery school program was there. We had the gym, the weightlifting, and the basketball. We also had a human services unit at that time, which was just really becoming developed, which had started essentially, I think, September '69. And we had the space and to do a number of different kinds of things, and we did them. We could do them, and it was frequented by, as I said, people representing most walks of life in Elmira. As you know, not many blacks own their own boats, so boating safety was not something that blacks would necessarily be that interested in. The hunting program was quite similar. It was more or less a program that was designed to meet the needs of hunters, primarily white hunters. We had the armory, and it was in the basement of the Neighborhood House where they could come and qualify for that. We also had sophisticated arts and crafts with the kilns and everything, the ovens or what have you, which were not readily available in other programs, agencies in the community. So that brought in people from all parts of our community to participate in that program. The nursery school program, again, met the needs of many people in the community. We had, let's see, I'm trying to think, it was so long ago now.
Did you have the Well Baby Clinic
The
there?
Well Baby Clinic was there. The Neighborhood House was probably one of the oldest organized programs, agency-type programs, in the whole community. The history goes back into the mid-1800s, okay? It wasn't called that then, but it was the forerunner of what became the Neighborhood House. And it has a rich history in that regard. And it has served at some time probably all people in the community.
Why did they decide to build a new neighborhood house?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I can give you an honest answer. When I took over in 1970, the plans had already been drawn up, and it was part of my initial responsibilities to see that the new facility was built. The old building was old, and it didn't look that well from the outside. And I think there were some of the community leaders at that time thought that it would be possible to put in a new facility, not have to deal with, the heating bills and the repair bills and whatever have you for trying to keep a series of old buildings functional. I think that went into the thinking of why we needed a new facility. There was an orange study done back in the 60s. I can't give you the exact year, but in that there was a need for several agency capital buildings, and there was a list of priorities as to what agencies would get their capital funding at what time and in what order. I think the Y was in, both Ys was included in that, and the Jewish Community Center was included in that, and the Neighborhood House. And the Neighborhood House was like number one, and that, I guess, gave impetus, or the authority, if you will, for serious planning for a new facility. Unfortunately, because of a number of factors, and one of being time, and we all know time means money when you're talking about construction, the original concept of a new facility changed markedly from what the architects had come up with originally, and what the board of directors of the Neighborhood House at that time felt that they needed to have included space-wise in the new facility. And what they ended up with was something much different than what they had, requiring significant change in programming.
Now, the old neighborhood house, how did it was a nonprofit agency,
Hmm.
and they got their money from United Way, or
Essentially, yes.
was
The
it United Way then, or was it a,
United Way,
what was it called, those feather agencies or something?
Red Feather Agencies, yeah, it was part of that funding. Yeah, the neighborhood house is so old, it went through probably all of those. But it was United Way, United Community Services funding.
Well, how did the housing authority get involved in the neighborhood house?
Because it represented a vehicle for the money. Um, the housing authority, which is
Kind of forced urban renewal to clean up the blighted areas and.
well, that's almost what I said.
All right.
I'm saying that
Okay. I guess
the
what I'm
flood, in
getting.
conjunction with urban renewal, made it possible for the city of Elmira to
Open housing.
come to a open housing arrangement, which I think many people benefited from, particularly the blacks.
What did that do to neighborhood house though?
Well, it worked against us in some respects because we no longer had a captive audience, so to speak. We had no target population that lived in and around the neighborhood house, so that young people, particularly who could run out the door and over to the neighborhood house or after school, what have you, now some of them had to consider, do I want to come from the far northeastern part of the community, or do I want to come from south side way over to the neighborhood house or whatever have you, in order to do some of the things they were doing before. And then once they got there, they didn't have the same type of activities available to them that they had before. So in a lot of respects, it did, the flood and what happened to the community as a result of that also affected various agencies, and ours, the neighborhood house, very significantly in that regard.
So you had to change your goals and your sites from what you had originally set out to do to serve the people that were there, which would be essentially Jones Court now.
Right. Well, that was one of our options. The other option was to look at our programming to the point where we could attract other people with the strength of our program to want them to come into it regardless of the distance, which we were not particularly successful at. We had some success, but not at the level that we had anticipated, because the nature of what we were able to offer had differed so markedly from what was available previously.
Well, you did have some successes there at
Oh,
the
yes.
neighborhood house, and I think one of them was your, I guess I would say your drama program.
Yes, our black and white teen theater was very successful. It was very controversial because people didn't understand where we were coming from. I say that out of lack of another way to express probably what I really feel, and that is that we as a people, I mean, the blacks as a people, not only locally but nationally, had to look at some other ways at getting ourselves ready to live in a different kind of society. And there was resistance to that. You know, there is resistance to social change, no matter who the people, regardless of their color. People just don't like to go through social changes, and I think we felt a lot of that.
But you did go to New York.
Our teen theater was very successful. We performed in places that had not been performed in before, essentially the prison system, not only locally but throughout the state. We were invited to perform at the Lincoln Center in New York City. We brought in professional artists to train our young people. Many of them benefited from it, and even today I have people who are involved in that project wish that there was something similar going on today, which probably, if there were, would be more appreciated, because young people now know that they need more than they did if they felt back then.
So you're a forerunner in being successful.
Yeah,
And that
forerunner
type
with a
of
lot
thing.
of scars to remind me of that.
So how long were you at the Neighborhood House?
Oh, about over 13 and a half years.
And why did you leave the Neighborhood House?
Well, essentially because of my health. I had developed a serious kidney situation which required I had specialized treatment and an eventual transplant. And the pressure of trying to operate that, and the fact that there was always constant money problems with the Neighborhood House, and the time demands were quite unreal, I think, when I think back on it now. Both day and night we were there doing a number of things for people or on behalf of people, and I wasn't physically up to it. And so I had to resign, and I almost, for the most part, kind of closed the book on the Neighborhood House after I did that, in terms of how it relates to me as a person.
Well, let me ask you about your kidney transplant. There's always been questions about blacks and whites and transplants, how their survival rate, and that sort of thing. You had a successful kidney transplant.
Well, so far it has been, yes.
Tell me a little about it.
Well, I don't know exactly what you might like to know about it, in that, to tie that into the oral history, I don't know how you'll do it, but
Well, I think the point is, I know that you took a lot of time to learn about kidney transplants. You also took some time to find out how black people were affected by transplants.
I did that, right.
And white people, and just to touch on that briefly.
Well, in my case, my kidneys were bad because of high blood pressure, hypertension. And I consider myself really fortunate to be alive, because my option would have probably been death or disabling, or far more disabling, stroke of some kind. So in an effort to prepare myself to live with what I was forced to do then, in terms of, which was to change my lifestyle significantly, I found that black people are prone to kidney trouble because of hypertension, which is, there are some studies that show that there's an ethnic inclination towards hypertension, particularly with blacks, and the Armenians have, in Europe, there's people that have a very similar kind of experience. In trying to do some research in order to prepare myself for what I had to face, I found that when I had to talk about, make a decision about whether or not to have a transplant or not, quite incidentally, I found that transplant from a black donor to a black patient aren't as successful a lot of times as if it's mixed race. In other words, a white donor and a black recipient. And part of that reason is because of that hypertension factor, that you may get a kidney that will be affected by the hypertension much more quickly, okay, than one if you got from another race. Now, in my case, I don't know the racial identity of my donor. I just know that I have a kidney of a young child, and and it's working. It's been working almost 4 years now, so pleased with that.
Well, you have been able to seek employment again,
Yes.
and at this time you are back again involved in EOP.
Right. Yes, and I'm back working hopefully on behalf of the community in a number of ways, but now I have the opportunity of making independent decisions as to what I will become involved in, opposed to the years of, particularly the years from 70 to 83, where I felt a kind of pressure to do things just because I was a black man, just because I was representing a people. Whether or not I really was is still a question in my mind.
Well, I think the school board, you were...
Yeah, I served on the school board from 1972 to 1977, essentially because, the need to try to provide greater input in the community from the minority segment of the community, so that we could prove to our counterparts that we can do a responsible job and can assume responsibility and are willing to do that. I have found myself since questioning the cost of that, but the truth of the matter is that some people have to do that, and that we can't foster a greater involvement in the community if nobody steps out to take that responsibility. That's the way I used to see myself, and what kinds of rationales I went through in order to take on another committee job or another
And you
area
have
of
taken on
responsibility.
another committee
Yeah.
job with
Right.
the Community Foundation.
Yes, I work with the foundation and now the Historical Society, and the Drug and Alcoholic Program, the Office of the Aging. I'm working with them. The main difference being is that I now have a choice, an opportunity to make the determination individually as to what I'd like to become involved in, where I feel like I can work in it, not add the kind of pressure that I experienced before, and yet make a meaningful contribution to the community, because I seem to be most comfortable when I'm working in that way.
Well, Delmar Rouse, you certainly are making a significant contribution to the community here in Elmira, and it seems to be ongoing. And I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, your ups and your downs, and I hope that you continue to enjoy good health, and I thank you
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.